Thank you for clicking on my extremely long video. If there's a specific augment you're interested in, use the timestamps in the description to jump to the part of the video you want to watch. Behold, a whole batch of mostly glorious changes to various Warframe ability augment mods. There are no new augments in here, these are changes to existing ones, but they're mostly pretty significant changes, so I'm going to go through them in reverse order from the patch notes, which you can find linked below. I'll show you the base ability where relevant, and talk about the previous version of the augment, and we'll check them out together. There's some very good stuff in here. A note before we start, our developers acknowledge that there are other augments that are also clearly weak and underused, but which they didn't change in this batch, because the base ability is really what needs work. Better to change the ability first and then figure out the augment. That's reasonable. Now, as we go through these augment changes, we'll talk about how true that is of this batch, but you know, that's a good effort. So keep that in mind. Vauban's getting a rework, so he won't be getting changes, for example. Moving right along. First up is Ivara's Piercing Navigator augment. So previously, basically this allowed you to fly your projectile around like Navigator usually does, and every time you hit something, you'd get critical chance up to 50%. That's nice. And now it gives you innate punch through. The main thing I want to note here, it's pretty straightforward, but the main thing is that this doesn't work with concentrated arrow. It does say removes punch through, but some people were wondering if maybe you could combine these and get punch through on the explosive arrow. You cannot. Smoke Shadow, an augment for Ash's stealth ability. So normally you do this little waboosh and you kind of get a smoke bomb effect as though for flare. With the Smoke Shadow augment, that smoke bomb effect also stealths your allies. Previously, the range of this augment was rather low, and it was essentially doubled, and now it's rather high. You can also see, due to the fact that augment details are in the tooltip, I don't have any range on this build currently, so you see it's 15 meter radius, and if I add, let's say, stretch, then that will go up to 21 meters. So that's a pretty large radius stealth. I think this is relatively powerful. It's also nice because I think at some point the duration wasn't affected by mods, and now it seems that it is. So it's a small change, but that's nice. Sonic Fracture. There's essentially nothing to say about this change, but I actually have a lot of talking points about this augment. So first of all, Sonic Boom is an ability that doesn't really do very much. It's essentially just a cone knockback without this augment, but with this augment, it reduces armor, and it's affected by strength, and it hits multiple enemies, so that's pretty good. You can easily just remove all armor from a whole group of enemies. Really good for multiplying damage against armored enemies along with sonar. So it fits Banshee. Again, Sonic Boom is a bit weak as an ability, to put it politely, without Sonic Fracture, but it's a good augment, very similar to Ash's Seeking Shuriken. They even both share that 70% innate. So the change to this augment was that the armor reduction is applied even with the ragdoll fails. So I guess before it must have been that if this doesn't successfully knock back an enemy, it wouldn't remove armor, and now it does, which, like, that's good, but it's kind of a bug fix. It's not really a change to the augment. Alright, here's the deal. I just got off a 12-minute take on this section about the elemental buffing augment changes to Ember, Frost, Oberon, Saryn, and Volt, because I'm really excited about them, but there's a ton to say, and it doesn't need to be that long, so I'm going to summarize a little bit. Please understand that these are really interesting to me, and we will cover them a lot more on this channel, but I want to get you through all the augments today, so let's begin. Basically what these are augments for Warframe First abilities that allow you to buff allies with elemental damage. The change that was made is that, quote, holding the casting button will send out a wave, much like similar expanding Warframe abilities, giving the elemental buff to every player it touches. That's one buff, and the second buff is including the caster, end quote. So now we have the ability to not only hit allies way more easily with these buffs, but also buff ourselves with this damage. And again, the 5 frames that got this are Ember, Frost, Oberon, Saryn, and Volt, who got respectively heat, cold, radiation, corrosive, and electricity. So for Ember, this actually doesn't really make much of a difference, unfortunately, because she already had Flash Accelerant. Ember was previously the only frame in the game that could already do all of these things. Heat would affect you and would easily be applicable to all allies, because this is radial, so you just activate it and you get heat. Everybody gets heat, so I'll show you the comparison between the two abilities. This is Flash Accelerant. Again, just everyone gets heat in a pretty big radius. You see it reached all the way over there. And this is the new Fireball Frenzy. So you hold down the ability and you get a wave in front of you. And it's in not only the direction you face, but apparently radial, which is really nice. That's awesome. It means it's really easy to buff people, and that is excellent. It creates this cool visual effect too. Wow, that's awesome, actually. I didn't notice that before. So again, the problem previously was that you had to physically hit your ally that you wanted to target with your first ability. So Good luck hitting your allies with fireballs in a game where you can jump and fly and be midair most of the time. It was nearly impossible to buff people before, and now it's quite easy, so that's great. But again, for Ember, it's not too exciting. Ember could already do this with Flash Accelerant. I'm going to put back on Firequake before I forget. And it is interesting for Ember, like buffing with heat is good. You can use innate electricity weapons modded with only toxin to create a switch that switches you between corrosive and gas. The weapon will innately have only toxin modded on, which will combine with that electricity, but the electricity combines after mods, and these act like mods. So if you activate Flash Accelerant, you'll switch from corrosive to gas and innate electricity. That's pretty good. Ember could already do this, but Volt sorta couldn't. Electric Shield already adds electricity damage, but it actually doesn't combine most of the time. So Shock Trooper is a way for you to add combinable electricity damage. Sometimes this isn't good. In Volt's case, I mean, if your target has floating cold, then you're gonna give them magnetic damage, which maybe isn't the greatest thing. That's really bad, but check out my Troll Duo build with JoeyZero, link in the description, for an example of that if you, for some reason, want to do it. But generally this is good. If they already have corrosive modded on, then you're going to be adding another electricity mod to their build that already has electricity mods, which means they'll get more corrosive. So if they're already using the element you give them, it will combine if they've combined it. So if they already have corrosive built, you're going to give them more corrosive, which is almost always very good. And if they're using, say, slash viral, maybe with 100 munitions, then you're going to give them stuns, which will allow the enemies to bleed out while they're not a threat because they're stunned. Again, generally pretty good. The magnetic damage part is not so great. Frost. Oh, this was an oof to use before. Again, just imagine trying to hit someone with this ability. You have to hit an enemy, an ally even, physically with this ability, with the main projectile, not with that explosion. The main projectile has to hit an allied player, an allied Tenno that is parkouring all over the map. It was virtually impossible before. Now it's pretty easy because you get the wave. Cold, I feel like, is generally a little bit better as a generalist element by itself. People aren't going to have floating electricity very often, so you won't accidentally give people magnetic as often, which is good. And Cold has good damage bonuses. You get a bonus against ally armor and then also shields. And Cold's proc is nice. It makes status effects last longer. This is not the same as encasing enemies in something, like when you shoot freeze at an enemy, they become encased in ice. That's not a cold proc, that's a like freezing effect. Which is not the same. That does pause status effect duration, but that's not the same thing as a cold proc, which lengthens status effect duration. That's pretty good. Most of the time, it's good with slash procs. It's good with like radiation procs, for example. So cold is good in general, even if a bit unexciting. It might be good to use high strength for a lot of cold, but Frost does have a few other augments that don't benefit from strength. Notably, Chilling Globe is pretty good and is not affected by strength, so I run this low strength sort of general support build. Cold procs for everyone. Saryn, a frame known for being very weak, is now really good because of this. No, I mean, Saryn doesn't need any help, and she got 2 augment changes. So I think the biggest problem here is that you're not likely to have all that much space on Saryn. She does want a lot of power stats. Saryn can be pretty greedy with her builds and really benefit from a lot of pretty much every stat. So I do think it's important to keep in mind that as much as Venom Dose is very good, giving people a ton of corrosive is almost always very good. Saryn doesn't necessarily have the space. Just because the augment is good doesn't mean you should run it, because you have a marginal benefit loss where you know, how much space do you really have? There's opportunity cost to using mods. Corrosive's damage bonuses are still really good, so even if you're buffing someone with a bad weapon that has no status, it's still usually going to help a lot. And again, because this is a combined element already, you're not going to muck up people's elements, although do keep in mind that if someone is relying on slash damage on a weapon for those slash procs, then you are going to take away their ability to consistently proc slash a little bit, and that will often lower their damage. But except in that case, you're almost always going to be actively helping a lot, and it will be a pretty large power boost for anyone affected. Not a lot of interesting buildcraft here, because you're literally just adding a combined element onto your weapons, and usually they're just going to be only corrosive or something else, and you don't want corrosive distracting from that. So but again, like, Saryn is great anyway, and this gives her some utility for general mission play. I feel like in Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, where Saryn is normally amazing, this doesn't do a lot, and in other missions maybe it does a little more. So sure, you know, it's still good. It's just maybe not what Saryn needs. Saryn doesn't really need anything. Oh, the big one, Oberon is giving people radiation damage. What does that remind me of? Oberon is currently a really good carry for Eidolons. He can heal the lures and prevent magnetic procs, and he does it all except provide a damage bonus. Now he does provide a damage bonus, and he even provides it to himself, making Oberon essentially the premier Eidolon carry or solo, and he really just does it all. You don't really... he's a whole party by himself. You wouldn't want to run like 4 Oberons because you still get more damage from running, say, a Chroma. Chroma will give you base damage, and Oberon will give you elemental damage. Those will combine, whereas if you had 2 Oberons, you're just going to add elemental damage. You want multiplicative damage bonuses of different types. So you don't want to run like 4 Oberons necessarily, but it's still really good, and especially, again, if you're doing public queue Eidolons, put this mod on your Oberon and leave it there until it rots off. This Zephyr augment has been troubling me, so it's called Target Fixation. It's a Tailwind augment, and basically it allows you to increase Tailwind's damage. Again, when you start reading this augment, if you're like me, I was thinking, wait, what are you talking about? Tailwind's damage? Oh, it has a hitbox. If you hit people in the air, it has a hitbox. So if you're flying through the air and you hit someone, it does damage, and the hitbox is affected by range. So that, I question whether you're ever going to use that. So the biggest problem with this augment, at least before, was that realistically you never use Tailwind for that. You use it as a movement thing. Now Zephyr doesn't have a ton of gameplay. Mostly Zephyr is just really good because she makes bullets not hit her ever, and then Jetstream is really strong. Her Tornado is actually alright. It can be good disruption, crowd control, and with funnel clouds you can do a lot of status. The tornadoes have very high status output, and you can put elemental damage in them. But yeah, like maybe damage nuking isn't exactly what I was looking for, but this augment's change does mean that now the damage you get while hitting enemies in the air persists for a few seconds while you're on the ground. The biggest thing to note here is whether or not this will be affected by duration. So we're just going to put the mod on. Is it affected by duration? Doesn't seem to be. So you have 2 seconds when you use this. So essentially what you could do, and again, we're gonna test this live and see if it works. Put on invincibility, simulate, and we're gonna use the dive bomb function of Tailwind, which is a lot easier to hit enemies with. So we're gonna dive into these enemies. Bam, we got damage, and now quickly dive bomb again, and we save the damage, and then quickly dive bomb again, and you could theoretically save up the damage, right? And now we're at 1800 damage. I mean, I don't think we're gonna be able to use that in 2 seconds. Yep, we lost it. But, you know, like, yeah, 1800 damage. So you could play with this if you wanted to. Nuking, bird bombing Zephyr could maybe be a build, I guess. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we're back to Volt, talking about a Transistor Shield augment buff. This was already such an amazing augment. I'm going to explain pretty much just what this did before, because it basically just got its numbers buffed, and it was already very powerful. So Electric Shield would allow allies to pick up your Electric Shields, which is nice. And now that doesn't drain your energy, which is nice. You don't have additional energy drain for 4 people carrying around shields. That's very good. Again, just the straight buff. It was pretty manageable before. But now, it gives you 300% of damage absorbed will be added to Volt's static discharge. This is Volt's passive. Essentially, while Volt is walking around, he accumulates some damage. You can see that in the top right corner. And it goes up to 1,000, and then on your next shot, it goes away, and then it starts charging up again, as you can see. Gone, and now it charges up again. So what Electric Shield, Transistor Shield Augment did was when damage went into your Electric Shields and was blocked, that would be given to your passive, and you would get some bonus damage on your next shot, up to 1,000. So if you have a very fast firing weapon, or a weapon that does a lot of packets of damage, like a beam weapon or an assault rifle, this would give you a ton of damage output over time. It seemed a little weak maybe when you read it at first, but now it doesn't because the number has been buffed to like 300%. So I don't remember what it was before, but this was a good augment before. If you haven't tried this, you definitely should. It's really strong. Even if allies never pick up your shields, it still affects yours. This is a very good augment. Play Riot Shield Volt. Brief note, if you want like a change of pace, you can actually hold Volt's Riot Shield while using your arc gun, if you would so choose. Well, there's that Electric Shield with us for the next 45 seconds. Contagion Cloud, a Toxic Lash augment for Saryn that previously caused Toxic Lash kills to generate a little Toxin Cloud that did damage over time for some time. This got buffed because its range is a lot bigger now. But the thing about this augment that you need to keep in mind is that it used to be that Toxic Lash didn't affect your guns before Saryn's rework, and now it does affect your guns. So not only does Toxic Lash now affect ranged weapons that can easily hit many targets, it also now creates toxic clouds that are a lot larger. The problem is that the damage is still kinda low. If you hit a lot of enemies, you can leave toxic clouds all over the map for a long time, but I tried this in ESO with this build that I normally use, and I just didn't find it to be that impressive. I just feel like you don't need it. Saryn already does so much damage. Again, it's almost like all of Saryn's augments, all I have to say about them is this is good, but it's completely unnecessary. Like, I don't really care about having a little more damage when I already have infinite damage over time spores, and Toxic Lash already gives you so much damage, and this is toxin damage, so it's still inhibited by armor all the same. I don't know, I just feel like whenever I shoot a group of enemies with Toxic Lash on, they're all gonna die anyway, so if there's a cloud there, I would say if you want to use this, the way to go would be to run a ton of duration and a lot of range and just let the clouds carpet the map. Especially in a defense mission, like an infested defense mission, I could see this being pretty nasty. But overall, again, it's a good buff. The range is bigger, and that's exactly what it needed. The range used to be tiny. They buffed the damage too. That's very nice. And a very, very important small buff that, again, like ultimately maybe doesn't matter because you don't really need this, but is important, is that now Contagion Cloud can make a cloud if the enemy is killed by a damage over time effect, which, is what Toxic Lash does. So that's important for its usability. It's quite consistent. It's not a problem with that. Again, just give it a try. I think you'll find that it's not bad, but just really not necessary. Piercing Roar. I don't have this augment, I don't think. Nah, I totally don't. Anyway, let's take a look. Piercing Roar is an augment that makes Rhino's Roar do a puncture proc. That's what it did before. Now, it makes enemies within 25 meters get knocked down and suffer from a puncture proc. It also allows Roar to be recast. Remember what I was saying before about maybe getting back to augments that should just be an innate quality of the ability? Roar being recastable should absolutely just be a quality of Roar. It should not be an augment effect. I still think this augment does essentially nothing. It's kind of decent now because being able to recast Roar is good, but it shouldn't be decent for that reason. Roar should just innately be able to do that. So I'm not a big fan of this one. Again, I feel like this did need a buff. Roar doesn't need a buff. This needed a buff. And it does CC now, which is okay. Rhino already has Stomp. The only thing that I'm kind of okay on with this is that you're already casting Roar, so it might in some situations save you energy if you wanted to stun nearby enemies, but you're already casting Roar, you will just get the stun already, which would save you energy because you don't have to stomp. And enemies die pretty fast in this game most of the time, so do you really need a longer stun than a knockdown? I don't know, but again, a puncture proc, that just doesn't really do a lot. You can now increase the duration of the puncture proc with mods, which is not significant. So again, I don't know, I think this is still pretty bad. Mirage got 2 augment changes, and I don't care about either of them. No, I'm a little biased against Mirage. I don't really like Mirage because she can't guarantee that her Eclipse will give her the buff she needs. You just light and dark interplay is a really interesting idea, but it doesn't really work very well in gameplay. A lot of the time there literally is no light or dark and that's the one you need, or it's just unreliable exactly what area that looks light will be light. And that's confusing, and I just wish that Mirage had an ability to guarantee an area of light or dark. Perhaps her second ability could provide something that just created an area of for sure light and for sure dark. Good placement is really interesting. Playing with light is really interesting. I think this ability is super unreliable, and Mirage is kind of the only frame in the game I don't like right now. So talking about Mirage's 2 augments, with that bias fully stated, Total Eclipse allows you to affect allies with Eclipse, which I was just saying is completely inconsistent and you virtually cannot reliably use. The range on being able to affect allies with this was increased. That's good, but again, it doesn't help a lot. Now, on the other hand, if Mirage did get changed in such a way that she could consistently get in light and dark, having a range increase would be integral to her success, because it would mean that she would easily be able to position the way she needed to be in light or dark, but still affect allies that, probably aren't right there, because she has to stand in a specific place. So that is a very good change for an augment that I do not care about literally at all. Explosive Legerdemain. Actually, I have a soft spot for this ability. So this is a really strange effect of sleight of hand. It turns like pickups, like ammo pickups and stuff, into explosives that do damage and proc a status effect based on what kind of thing it is. You can read the wiki for all the details of that. I mean, long story short, you're not missing too much, but what you should know is that ammo pickups, which is, going to be most of them, proc cold. And now this is a 100% status chance. Most of the pickups you're going to turn into bombs are going to be ammo, and now this will proc status every single time. And the damage is not awful. So you can use this if you have a lot of loot, or maybe you're playing with a loot frame ally. You can make all of your pickups, I believe it's client side, and you won't take away your allies' pickups, into bombs that will proc cold. That's fine. It's certainly better than it was before. The damage and status chance were increased, and again, critically, the status is now 100%. That's good. Previously, the status was not affected by mods, if I recall. So again, like, it's a good change, but it doesn't really change any of the things that I really don't like about Mirage. So I don't know. I really hope Mirage gets a gameplay refresh because she's got a lot of really cool ideas. She just suffers from crippling inconsistency. Muzzle Flash, a Mesa augment that is, I believe, the only augment of this batch to receive a total overhaul rather than a buff or a change or something. So previously how this worked is that when Shooting Gallery was active, as it moved from ally to ally, it would create a blinding flash around you and the ally. It's like a little radial blind. Now it does something completely different. So when you or the player affected by Shooting Gallery get a kill or an assist, you get a charge. And after 6 charges, your next shot will blind enemies within 12 meters of you for 6 seconds. And that's really all there is to say about it. That's what it does. The fact that it's not around the bullet is a little disappointing. That could have been kind of cool. It could have been like a weird ranged radial blind Mesa, his ranged Excalibur build. Some people were talking about making Melesa, where you have like flashes around. Basically, you are Excalibur, but you're playing Mesa. The thing about this is that Mesa doesn't benefit very much from range. Her other abilities, range essentially does nothing. So having a mod that relies heavily on range, although the base range is pretty good, is not so great. So I don't recommend this one, but that's what it does. And it's interesting that they gave it a full overhaul. I have mixed feelings. Previously, you could make a pretty funny build where you had practically no duration, and then you'd activate Shooting Gallery, and it would basically just be a radial blind and then go away. So you could have like Flash Grenade Mesa, which was not good, but it was kind of funny. So, Magnetized Discharge is a magnetized augment for mag. Surprise. Basically, the change here is that now you get passive range on Magnetize only when you have this augment equipped. So what this does is allows you to detonate Magnetize instead of casting multiple, which is cool, and then it can disarm enemies. That part's great. That's always been fine. Now you get passive range. It's actually kind of large, so I'll show you a comparison. So we'll cast Magnetize with my build against these enemies. I have like medium range. And you can see, you actually kind of can't see because of my energy color. There you go. The range is, it's fine. And then when we activate and equip Magnetized Discharge, you'll see that the radius is bigger, which is good. Yeah, like, I don't know, shouldn't you just equip a range mod? But I guess you sort of don't need it that badly. Like, Counterpulse doesn't really care that much about the range. So maybe it doesn't matter so much. Go figure. It's fine. And again, as you'll see, the radius increase is actually fairly big. It's not bad. It's noticeable. It's 45%. Tidal Impunity. Even as someone who really likes Hydroid, I actually don't own this augment either. But basically, it gives you status immunity when you use Hydroid's Wave, his second ability. So we'll take a look at that. As you can see, it clears status effects and gives 12 seconds of proc immunity to you and allies that come in contact with it. The buff that they gave this is that the duration is longer, and man, that's long. Basically, what I have to say about this is that I don't really think you need this. If you get a status proc as Hydroid, you can just go into your puddle and you won't die from it. But that gives allies a lot of immunity. Like, that's pretty long, and that's the base duration. Hydroid, not the smallest fan of duration in the world either, so you'll probably have more. Yeah, I mean, this is fine. Like, how often are you really going to hit allies with it? In, like, Eidolon fights, you could make them immune to Magnetic, for example, but you could also just play Oberon. So, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about this. Hydroid is not a bad generalist, but he's also a sort of interception specialist. He's very good at zone control, so this doesn't have a lot to do with that, but he still has decent generalist play, so I mean, it's a good general use mod. I'm tempted to say Rolling Guard is also not a bad substitute, but 12 seconds of immunity is a pretty long time. Furious Javelin, an Excalibur augment for Radial Javelin that makes it so every enemy hit gives you melee damage. The critical thing to know about this is that this game never clarifies what type of damage it is when you get damage, and that's the thing you always want to know. Is it base damage? Is it extra damage? Is it, you know, elemental damage or whatever? The critical thing to know about this is that it is a totally separate multiplier from every other type of damage. That's a lot. 10% for every enemy hit, and you get 12, if I recall, yes, javelins. That's a lot of damage, and that's affected by strength. So realistically, most of the time, this just doubles your overall damage. Like, doubling your Exalted Blade damage is not bad. The reason I don't really recommend this is simply because Excalibur doesn't really need it. The change they made here is just that it's twice as powerful as it was before. It was just kind of weak before. Now it is twice as strong as it was. You still, I don't think, should use this because you do not need any more damage on Exalted Blade. You already have the huge base damage and guaranteed status and radial blind for stealth multipliers. You do not need more damage. But if you feel like you need more damage, there you go. Back to Oberon, who's getting a really good swing of things this time. Hallowed Eruption. This is interesting. So previously this meant you couldn't make multiple Hallowed Grounds, but if you recast Hallowed Ground, it would explode and deal the damage it would have done over its whole duration all at once, which was quite a lot. This is interesting both because that's a fair amount of damage and it's radiation damage, and also because you could affect the damage with duration. If you made it last longer, it would do more damage. So cool. The change they made is that now this augment passively just makes Hallowed Ground last twice as long, which is really interesting because now it means you can use it not only for zone control to make Hallowed Ground last a really, really long time, you can also increase the damage. This also directly increases the damage. Again, a simple buff, but it's good. Atlas's Titanic Rumbler augment, one of my least favorite augments in the game, and it got a pretty good shake. This makes it so you make a single Rumbler instead of two, and it has more health and damage. Previously, the problem with this is that the values were just so low that it literally made the ability worse, and there just wasn't a reason to use it. It was supposed to draw aggro, but it didn't do a very good job of that. It still does not do a good job drawing aggro, but it is a lot beefier and does more damage, and these do okay damage. And now it has a triggerable taunt, quote-unquote. Again, it doesn't, in my experience, do an effective job of taunting, but it does do a knockdown in a rather large area that is affected by range. I think I prepared a build for this, actually. We can just use this as an example. So we'll put Titanic Rumbler in here, and we have some range, so we're going to summon it. There it is. And now you can hold down the button, or hit it again, to taunt, quote, but it's actually just the knockdown. And again, this range is pretty big, so we're going to take it into combat, bring it over here, and you're going to see that if I trigger this effect, it's going to knock down enemies in a big area, very big area. That has a 5-second cooldown, but it doesn't cost energy. The 5-second cooldown is shown up top. So you can see I can just keep hitting the button, and it will knock down enemies periodically, which is quite nice. In a fairly large area. Again, that's not bad. This doesn't cost energy, which is good. It has an internal cooldown, but it's not too long, which is good. The internal cooldown isn't affected by mods, which is bad. And the worst thing about this ability is that Rumblers are actually often more useful for getting rubble than for doing Rumbler things, and you cannot reactivate your Rumblers to blow them up for rubble while you have this augment equipped. The way I usually use Rumblers is like this. Okay, well, with a lot of energy, you can just repeatedly reactivate them and gain 100 rubble every single time, which is, I think, the more helpful way to use them. And then you can use them as decoys, and if you want to use them as decoys, it's helpful to have 2 of them. So while this is certainly better than it was, and pretty good on balance because you get large CC, Atlas already has almost entirely CC in his kit. So I feel like it's not entirely necessary. It's at least a lot better, which is good. The third augment that I do not have is Rising Storm. This is an augment for Ashe's Blade Storm that allows you to hit enemies with Blade Storm and increase combo counter. It now increases your combo counter by 4, which is quite nice. Blade Storm is affected by the combo counter. It always has been, which is quite good. And now it passively increases the duration of the combo counter. Previously, basically what this did was just make the combo counter kind of stay a little longer when you used Blade Storm, which is, again, a very small effect, but now it increases the combo duration everywhere for longer, which is good, and it means your Blade Storm attacks count for more melee hits than normal. This is quite good. Blade Storm is affected by the combo counter's damage multiplier, and not much else, So this is a good way to make it so as you Bladestorm, you do more and more and more damage. That did happen before, but just not much more damage. Now you will see a very large ramp up in damage over the first few Bladestorms. Again, that's good. Bladestorm doesn't strictly speaking need more damage, but that's a good change. Finally, we have Valkyr with her Hysterical Assault Augment, something I quite like. This is an Exilus Augment, so you can put it in your Exilus slot, which is nice, and it allows you to do a targeted leap on enemies that you aim and use the alt fire, or now it's melee attack, on up to 50 meters away, which is, again, also quite far. This is nice. There is kind of a second change in here that is a little tricky. So now, when you use Hysterical Assault, that is, you're aiming to use Hysterical Assault, you have invulnerability for half a second. The critical thing about this is that previously, if you activate your Hysteria and then you go into a gun, you would immediately lose the invulnerability, which I guess is fair, and then if you meleeed, you'd immediately get it back. Now with this augment on, you actually keep the invulnerability for just a second, and then it goes away. So if you aim, you save it for a moment. I have invulnerability on, so you can't see that. But you can see I'm vulnerable now because I have my gun out, but Hysteria is still active. If I melee, I'm immediately invulnerable. If I aim, I have half a second where I'm not vulnerable, and then I become vulnerable again. So you have time to aim and then do your leap. But the thing is, more realistically, this augment is better for allowing you to shoot guns while invulnerable using Hysteria, and that should be a base quality of the ability. That doesn't really have anything to do with the augment's use. Obviously, it's nice for quality of life, like if you're doing the thing, I'll activate Hysteria, aim, and leap, and I was invulnerable that whole time. That's the intention. I get that. The problem is that in practice, it's much better to be meleeing like this, and then I can be invulnerable. I'm invulnerable to these rockets, and I aim and shoot my shotgun, and then melee, and I'm still invulnerable. And I can aim and shoot my shotgun and melee, and I'm still invulnerable. So realistically, I mean, this isn't quite the same as the cases where I was saying, you know, this should obviously just be a quality of life thing for the ability overall. This is a case where I get how that's related to Hysterical Assault, but it's not, that's not really the reason you would equip it. And I do think it's important for game design. You know, you tell me what you think too. Like, I feel like it's important that the augments be good for what they're supposed to be good for, rather than it having the kind of bad feeling where it's like, you need to put this augment on, but not for what it does, just because it does like some other not necessarily related thing that you're taking advantage of. Like, if that's going to be a quality of Hysterical Assault, then okay, but maybe we focus on it. And if it's not, then I think that should just be a little quality of life thing for the weapons. I mean, for goodness sake, sometimes when I'm using Hysteria, I'm aim gliding or something, and I'm like, whoops, I just realized I made myself vulnerable and I die in midair. So I think you should have a little grace period. It doesn't have to be too long. The ability already makes you invulnerable, for goodness sakes. But, you know, I don't know. So that's my 2 cents. Let me know what you think. I am curious, like, if people really disagree with that, you know, go figure. But I do think that should just be rolled into the ability innately. Okay, that's all of them. It was a lot of them. I say that like, that was easy, we're done. That was a whole bunch of them. So yeah, these are really exciting. Personally, as I said, I'm most excited by the elemental buffing augments. I think these provide a lot of buildcraft opportunities that I was already foolishly trying to make work before, so I'm really happy that they're actually viable in some way now. And there are a lot of other interesting things. I do have a few duds, again, like the Roar one, I just feel like that still doesn't really do anything. It's not awful, it's definitely better, but and the Roar being recastable should just be a thing. I don't know about abilities not being recastable in the first place, ever, really. And there are some weird cases like Chroma where Vex Armor is recastable, but Elemental Ward isn't, and it's like, I don't know. But yeah, go figure. I mean, let me know what you think. I'm sure people will have lots of opinions about this one. I really like this kind of update. I really appreciate that they reworked all of these. And the critical thing you need to remember one last time is that if something you thought needed reworking was not touched, they specifically did not rework those things now because they want to rework the ability at its core. If the ability is just bad, you don't want to augment it and make the augment really good so the ability is good, because then you just need the augment slot. I really don't think that that's a good solution, and they have, I believe rightly, chosen to rework those abilities separately. So keep in mind that in some cases that's happening. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that it inspired you to make glorious buildcraft of your own. I'll catch you next time.